Welcome to episode 59 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. In this episode's main segment, I'm interviewing writer-director Chris Sparling. We're going to be talking about his latest film, The Atticus Institute, so stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread the word about the podcast. Over on YouTube, I want to thank Ginger Shine and Stanford Crane for leaving me a nice comment on episode 56, and thank you, Bill Bridges, for leaving me a nice comment on episode 55. I always look at these comments, so if you have a question or comment about the episode, please don't hesitate to leave it over on YouTube. YouTube has a very nice commenting system, so it's easy for me to respond to your questions and comments. Thank you, everyone who has subscribed to my YouTube channel. The SYS channel is pushing close to 600 members. So if you use YouTube a lot, please do consider subscribing to my channel. And on Twitter, thank you, Adam Santos, Screenwriting Process, L. Fabry, and Lucy Hay, who retweeted various past episodes on Twitter last week. Thank you guys for those. And on Facebook, thank you, everyone who liked our page. We had a bunch of likes last week, and I really do appreciate it. If you use Facebook, please do like our page. I look at all the messages, questions, and comments that come in through Facebook, and I try and respond to all of them. So that's a very good way to get in touch with me. You can find our Facebook page at facebook.com/sellingyourscreenplay. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts, and then just look for episode number 59. Also, if you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address, and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, how to write a professional logline and query letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm talking with screenwriter and director Chris Sparling. Here is the interview. Welcome back, Chris, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show again.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
So I usually start out just by asking filmmakers to talk about kind of how they got started and broke in. Since you were already on an episode, we will skip that and dig into your latest film. I will just refer people back to episode number 24 if they're interested in kind of hearing how you broke in and kind of got to where you are today. So let's go ahead and dig into your latest film, The Atticus Institute. Maybe to start out, you can give us kind of a quick logline for the film for people that haven't seen the trailer or haven't seen the film.
Yeah, the log line, I guess, would be that there's a small psychology lab in Pennsylvania somewhere that it's a parapsychology lab. They study things like telekinesis and ESP clairvoyance, and they're brought a very unique new test subject. This one that comes in to be she brought in by her sister to be researched, and because she exhibits pretty incredible psi abilities. And the researchers begin to understand that this woman's testing off the chart. She is, far more gifted in that way than any other person that's ever come through their lab. And they also start to realize that her abilities are above their pay grade to fully appreciate and study. So from the Defense Department is brought in, and that person confirms the fact that she has these abilities, but what it prompts is a deeper exploration and investment by the government. So the Defense Department comes in and really starts to study this woman. And what they begin to understand is that the source of her power is actually something malevolent. And they soon determine that she's possessed. And as is the case with, these stories of possession, kind of the abilities mirror, someone with psi abilities, that's kind of what usually people that they kind of have those similar abilities. So anyway, the government realized there's an opportunity here for a military application of this force, of this entity, and they subsequently attempt to weaponize this entity, and kind of all hell breaks loose.
Perfect verb. Yeah, that's a good summation of it. So I'm curious, where did this idea come from? Is it, the way it's kind of couched is almost like maybe there was just some shred of truth. Maybe you read a news article, but where did the seed of this idea come from?
No, as far as, I'll just address that part first. As far as the shred of truth goes, I mean, there certainly is a lot of truth, more than shred to how the government in the 60s and 70s was investigating SYS and exploring military application of that sort of thing. The KGB was doing the same. You know, there were real efforts made. There's actually documentation you can find online that demonstrates that. But as for the idea of the possession and everything else and weaponization of a possessed person, it was an idea I had. It was just something for a long time I just thought of, and it was related to just possession stories in general. So, you know, between the books and the movies and just the first-person accounts you hear of people saying that these real-life stories. I mean, you hear these people, and they seem very, very truthful. And they're not being truthful, but they certainly seem pretty vehement in what they're saying, that this stuff is real. I saw this with my own eyes. They did this. They levitated the chair, flung across the room, all these things. They could speak 30 languages, all this stuff. And you know, it seemed, and like I said, I didn't know. I was always kind of like, well, I don't know if it's real or not. It sounds real. But the one thing that ultimately always tipped me in the direction of, well, I guess at the end of the day, it's not real, is the fact that the government never got involved. Because the way I always saw it was that if you had someone that had these actual abilities, that could levitate stuff, could read people's minds, could stop people's hearts, whatever, that person is like a mutant from X-Men. You know, it's like, and that person, therefore, would be a threat to national security. They can't just roam around. You know, what if they killed the president? What if they kill? You know what I'm saying? It's like So to me, the fact that government never clamped down on this and never intervened was proof positive at the end of the day that this stuff is, or at least must be fake. So that kind of then led me to the question of, well, hold on a second, what if there was a situation where the government did step in and they did determine that there was a real case of possession and someone could do these things? And then going beyond that, well, all right, so what would they do? They would confirm it, that's great, but wouldn't they attempt to weaponize it? And that's kind of what I tried to posit with this film.
Yeah. And what were some of your influences going into this? I mean, I was kind of trying to think about it. I mean, it's sort of almost like The Exorcist meets Blair Witch. I mean, what was some of the influences you had going into this film?
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly it's unavoidable to not have any sort of possession movies in some way influences. I think especially a movie as great as The Exorcist, where it's like it's going to be at least a part of that patchwork quilt in a way, you know. And so what separated, not say separated, but what I wanted to try to do with this movie to make it different than say other possession movies was to approach it from this very scientific way. You know, so this wasn't a movie where you have a possessed person and let's go get the exorcist right away and let's have them come in and do all this thing and perform the exorcism. This I wanted to be a scientific exploration of possession. What goes on in the body if this is going on? Physiologically, what goes on? How do you explain, you know, at a quantum level what might be going on? All these things. So that's why I wanted to take a very scientific approach. But above and beyond that, in terms of the documentary style, a couple things influenced that. There were a couple of movies, first of all. One was the movie Death of the President. And that was a movie about the assassination of George Bush. It came out, a fake documentary. It came out while George Bush was still alive. I remember watching it at the time and being ripped. Because even though you knew it was fake because George Bush was still alive and in office at the time, it was really well done. And it just, because it was presented, the information was being presented in the talking heads, in particular by, you know, people of authority. You know, you had members of the Secret Service, you had the department, someone from the Secretary of State, or whatever the case may be. And even though they weren't the real people, you just went along for the ride. And that's kind of in a way how the Milgram study, in a way, the Stanley Milgram study, the obedience to authority study, in a way, informed a lot of this and influenced a lot of this movie. And that is where you have authority figures, you know, be it someone from the government, a scientist, a researcher, people that we tend to believe when they speak. As that study shows, we tend to believe people. We tend to obey those people and take them at their word. So by, like they did in Death of a President, by really filling the movie with authority figures, it just made it seem that much more believable. And so I was like, that's an interesting thing. And so I kind of tried to mirror that approach where I have a lot of authority figures, scientists, like I said, government people in government circles, telling these stories, which I felt kind of lended more credence to what was being told. And then also just later on in the game, as I was kind of figuring out how to make this movie, I remember my agent recommending I check out Lake Mungo, which was also a fake documentary genre movie that I thought was really well done as well.
Perfect. I'm curious, would you consider this movie a found footage film? I mean, it kind of has that mockumentary style, and sort of is there? I mean, when you present this, did you present it as this is a found footage film?
Well, I'm not even, and I'm thinking alone with this. I'm not even sure found footage is even like the right term anymore for those sort of movies. Because, I mean, I know it's just it's just a term, but at the same time, I think everyone by this point understands there's no found footage. Everyone realizes these aren't real movies. They're real movies. They're not real. I shouldn't say that. What I'm trying to say, they're not real fake. They're not real. Like you can find this footage in the middle of the woods.
I mean, Blair Witch Project didn't have any of those cuts away, those documentary cuts that you had, sort of the modern day people where there were, talking to the camera. It didn't have those. So this is definitely a different sort of setup, conceit.
Yeah, it's a different thing for that reason too. I view it more as just, what I was creating is kind of archival footage. This is more like a normal documentary where you have the talking head. In any standard, even Discovery Channel documentary, you just have a lot of talking heads, and then you're cutting to photos. You're cutting to, archival footage you might have of the event that the people are describing, and that's kind of the format this movie follows. And, in getting back to my earlier point about found footage, it's not the term found footage, just that blanket term, I don't think really works anymore because it worked for Blair Witch because back then people, there wasn't IMDb. The internet wasn't as expansive as it is now, where you can find out this isn't found footage, this is a movie. So it seems like the term is pretty antiquated by now, and it almost should be just painted through like first-person movies or POV movie. I don't know, but in either case, I feel like the Atticus Institute is a little bit different than those sort of movies. Just like The Last Exorcist. It's different because that follows more like first person, just we're going to follow people around with the camera the whole movie. As much as I enjoyed Daniel's movie, he made something different, and this is a movie that's more of a standard documentary.
Yeah. And just, I mean, does part of this, and this is kind of getting in more of the nuts and bolts of writing it and I guess knowing potentially you're going to direct it, doing something like this, obviously it allows you to contain the budget somewhat. And I mean, is that a part of your thinking process, or you just thought this was a cool idea and, hey, it happened to be something that you could shoot on kind of a lower budget as well?
Yeah, that was part of it. I mean, I wanted to be able to present, in my efforts to direct a movie that I wrote, I wanted to be able to present a package that was very difficult to say no to, for financiers, and part of that meant creating something that could be done for a relatively modest budget, and so to really make that happen, to be able to make that budget achievable, a movie at that level achievable. I felt that the documentary approach certainly helped in that regard because you had half of your movie, at least, is going to be just standard talking head documentary, which, still isn't easy necessarily to do, make it seem like it's real, but it's cheaper because it's very straightforward. So it was part of my decision making in terms of the budget was part of the decision making.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about sort of the evolution of this movie. And I'm always curious to hear, and I know some of my listeners will too, just sort of how a project like this goes from basically an idea to becoming a full-fledged movie that you've directed. Maybe just bring us back. I mean, what was sort of the logistics? Did you have the idea? Did you present it to some producers and they said, great, we'll finance this, go write it? Did you write it on spec and then start taking it to producers? Sort of how did the film go from just an idea in your head to actually getting produced?
Yeah, I had the idea, and I was, I just was really eager to direct something. And this you see, it's always inspiring every year when you see people kind of making their own movies, or really they turn out well and everything else. And I've been lucky enough to have success as a writer by this point, and I wanted to break into directing. And so it was almost like, well, I need to direct a movie. I mean, that's what I was finding and realizing more and more, that if I ever want to direct a movie, I need to first direct a movie. So I was faced kind of with this catch-22. And so I pretty much resolved to say, all right, well, I'm going to direct a movie. I'm going to make a movie, and this is the idea, and this is how the approach I'm going to make it. So therefore, it's it's in a genre that generally is it appeals to a very loyal fan base, and you don't necessarily need a whole bunch of money to make something that is going to be, at least half of it is going to be talking a documentary. And on top of it, it's that you don't need A-list actors, or at least totally recognizable actors in the movie, because that actually in a way hurts you because you want it to seem real. So that was all part of what I had in my mind. And I partnered actually early on with this woman, Lee Medeiros, I live in Rhode Island. Lee lives in Rhode Island as well. And I asked her if she wanted to come on board as an associate producer. And so I wrote the script, and it was great to have Lee on early because she kept me accountable. Instead of just kind of kicking this plan to make a movie down the road and just continuing to write and try to get assignment work as a writer, there's now someone that's going to kind of keep me on task and like I said, keep me accountable, because I've now have someone else that I've brought into this process with me. And so she was great early on to work with. And then once I finished the script, I looked first to Peter Safran, who I've now, has produced 2 movies that I've written, and I have, a really good working relationship and friendship by this point with Peter. And so he was naturally the first person I went to. And, in typical fashion with Peter, it's kind of the way he worked with the 2 movies of mine before this that he's produced. With Buried, I met with Peter when Buried first went around town. There were a lot of producers that were interested, and a couple of studios that were interested, and they all wanted to change it. But Peter was the only person to come to, basically when I met him, this is my first time actually ever meeting him, he said, look, I love your script. I don't want to change anything about it. I know the perfect director to do it, and I can have it in production in 6 months. And true to his word, that's what happened. And so the same thing happened with ATM, where we were in Barcelona shooting Buried, and we're at lunch one day, and he's like, Chris, do you have any other contained thriller movie ideas that you've been kicking around? And so I told him, I kind of pitched him ATM, and he's like, that's great, man. Write it, and I'll make it. And I wrote it, and he made it. So now it's almost like, it only made sense to turn to him first. And so I sat down for lunch. I gave him the script before I showed it to anybody else. I wanted him to have the first crack at it, essentially. And I was very fortunate in that, by the end of lunch, he was like, I told him how I wanted to make the movie and how I could achieve it for a certain budget level. And it all made sense to him, as I hoped, like kind of how I hoped to position the movie. It made sense the way I thought it did. And by the end of lunch, we were in pre-production, essentially.
Yeah, okay. And take us back. So maybe I got her name wrong. You say her name is Lee Medeiros?
Medeiros, yes.
Okay.
Is,
now, you said she lives in Rhode Island, but exactly how did you meet her?
And writer.
I'm sorry, say that.
I think I initially, even though I don't think I knew her prior to, even though we both lived in Rhode Island, and it actually means something in terms of knowing someone or not knowing something because the state is so small. I surprisingly didn't know her prior to that, but I think once I started on Twitter years ago, I think I think she reached out to me early on, and then I was like, we knew, this is the way it is in a small state like Rhode Island. If you don't know someone, you know someone they know, and it just turned out to be the case. And so she and I have kept in touch for the years, and now when it came time to have someone to work with that I could, like I said, someone local that I felt like I could, again, it wouldn't be as simple. I could have just said, well, look, I'll tell my reps, hey, I want to do this movie. And that wouldn't have been the same level of accountability. And on top of it, I knew Lee could bring value to the project in terms of, she's good at what she does as well. And I knew she'd have some insights into, some drafts of the script and everything else that would certainly be beneficial. And she did. So it was a nice way to get the project, at least written, and then go from there.
And so she didn't necessarily bring financial resources to the project. It sounds like she helped with the development of the script. That was the main thing.
Yeah, she did.
Oh.
She was, like I said, she was really important in particular earlier phases of the script phases. And then once the script was done and everything else, then I was able to get her on board to produce, and he was able to bring in financing. And then Dan Clifton, who I worked with on ATM, he produced that as well. Dan came on board as executive producer in this, and Dan very much, it was almost like a baton handing off. So he was kind of who I was working with early on in the script phase, and then once we got into the actual production phase, the baton was handed off from her to Dan and to Peter.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I think a lot of writers, and I think it's interesting just hearing this story, and I think one of the points that it illustrates to me, I think a lot of new writers especially, they kind of feel like, man, if I get the agent or the manager, everything is golden. I think it's interesting here, you haven't even mentioned your agent and manager, and in a situation like this, you're going straight to the producer. What impact do your agents and managers even have in something like this, if any?
Well, they do. I mean, naturally, I did give them the script to see and to. I mean, of course, you want to get their temperature in terms of whether or not you think this is a viable project. You know, they may look at it and go, they may just say the script isn't good, and it doesn't really help you as a writer in terms of your place in the marketplace. You know, as far as how you're viewed. But they all liked the script, and they all felt that there was something there. So. You know, they were very much on board. You know, I was able to get it to Peter with ease. You know, I think gave it to Peter, and I think my agent ended up giving it to him pretty much maybe the next day. You know, or they kind of just. So everyone was fine with the idea of Peter being, you know, hopefully being the producer. You know, is our choice. But you know, the reality is that had Peter passed, had he been busy doing a project or whatever the case may be, you know, my reps would have then been getting it out to other potential producers and financiers. Yeah.
Yeah. And were there any false starts? I mean, as I do these interviews, you know, there's a lot of the directors and the producers, they think they're going into production and the money falls through. I mean, it sounds like this was a pretty painless process. Did you have any sort of bumps, ups and downs while you're getting it ready?
No, not really. You know, I was really fortunate in that it was very streamlined and almost problem-free process. You know, I mean, I think part of that was helped by the fact that it was a relatively modest budget that we had to work with. So in terms of, you weren't talking about millions of dollars being spent here or on the line here, so where people might get feet. You had a very, you know, again, a modest budget. The numbers worked out. You could kind of forecast how the movie could, at the very least, come close to being come close to breaking even, or, you know, foreseeably break even, and potentially make some profit. So it wasn't a huge gamble, and I think that helped.
Yeah. And that might even lead into the next question I have. Do you have any advice for writers that, you know, want to be directors as well? Did you get any pushback from people and say, well, I like the script, but maybe we could have this other guy direct it?
Well, not necessarily this. What prompted the whole idea of doing Atticus for me, you know, and was because I bumped up against that and run up against that situation you're describing, where I had some, you know, like I was very lucky and I'm very grateful. I've had success as a writer. I've had movies made, and, you know, I've kind of established myself as, you know, as a professional around town, where I do my work and I do a good job. And so I've made contacts that way, obviously, and gotten to know a lot of people that can help get a movie made. And so as I was continuing to write more projects of mine, as they were getting closer, you know, I would say, you know, this might be one I want to direct. And everyone was on board with it, my reps and everything else. They were like, yeah, I think this is something that'd be great for you to direct. And in even early discussions with producers, so like, yeah, that's a real possibility that happen. It just seemed like every time the project would move closer and get closer to being real, and, you know, in terms of, you know, securing the financing, whatever the case may be, I kept running into the first-time director problem. You know, the financier is cold feet about a first-time director, or maybe certain pieces of talent have, you know, cold feet about working with a first-time director, and kept realizing that, all right, this is going to keep happening. You know, this isn't going to magically one day stop happening. At least I don't think it will. So I have to kind of manifest that change myself, and to do that. And that's kind of what I said to you earlier, where I had to find a way around that catch-22, and so I had to make a movie if I wanted to make a movie.
Yeah, sure. Well, how can people see the Atticus Institute? Maybe you could just give us some release dates and tell us where this movie is going to be available.
It's currently out on iTunes, and I think for purchase, and then it's going maybe I think on Xbox as well, and maybe Amazon for purchase. Okay. But it will be on VOD for rental on January 20th, and that's also the VOD and DVD Blu-ray release. And then I believe March 23rd is when it comes out in the UK.
Perfect. So I always like to end, maybe you could just tell us what's the best way for people to kind of follow you if you're on Twitter or Facebook or have a blog or anything. Maybe you could just throw out some of those links.
I'm not on Facebook, for better or for worse, but I am on Twitter. I'm at, it's just my name. I'm at Chris Sparling.
Okay, perfect. I will link to that in the show notes, and I will also link to the trailer so people can check that out. Well, Chris, once again, this has been a great interview. I really appreciate your coming on and talking with me. I wish you the best with this movie. I watched it last night and enjoyed it, so, job well done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on. Just a quick plug for my email and fax blast query service. Just in the last 18 months, I've optioned 8 scripts, sold 1 script, and got 1 decent paid writing assignment. And this all came through the use of my own email and fax blast query service. Here's how it works. First, you join SYS Select. Then you post your logline and query letter in the SYS Select forum. I review your logline and query letter and help you make them as good as they can be. Then you purchase the blast, and I send it out to you. The emails are sent as if they're from your email address, so all replies go directly back to you. You can exclude companies if there are specific companies you don't want to send to. Just check out www.sellingyourscreenplayselect.com to learn more. In the next episode of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Bo Martin Williams. He's an actor and a screenwriter who recently completed a feature film called Americans. We dig into the specifics of how he got this film made. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. I think the main takeaway for me from this episode was how he got his script to the producer, was how Chris got his script to the producer who could get the financing and get the film made. This is really the most difficult part of filmmaking, and so knowing producers that actually can get this done is really crucial. Everyone talks about how this business is being about relationships, and that's just so true. Chris took it to a producer that he had a relationship with. He didn't need an agent for this either, and he wasn't born with this connection. It was a connection he got from a previous film, and it all started with him writing something good that he sent out and got some traction with. So go back and listen to episode 24 where he really explains how he got to this point. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like he just got it to this producer and it was off to the races. I definitely think listening to episode 24 will kind of give you the backstory. It started with him writing a spec script that he was just going to go write and direct himself called Buried. That got some traction. That was the producer who ended up producing this as well. So it really did start, though, with him just going out and doing something on his own and trying to make things happen for himself. And I'm just a firm believer in that. Also, one key is he made a very important strategic decision to write something that could be shot on a relatively small budget. It's really unlikely that someone would have let him direct a $30+ million film. He knew what he could get funding for, and so that's what he wrote. This is important to understand. Whatever level you're at, if you're a writer and you want to direct your own material, you should be writing stuff that you actually have a chance to get funding for. He had some great connections in the industry, a decent track record as a screenwriter, and he still knew that his best chance of getting something made was writing something that could be made relatively cheaply. So for someone who's just starting out and who doesn't have his track record and doesn't have his connections, I would really be trying to write something that you can go out and shoot yourself without needing the help from needing anybody's help. That's how you're going to ensure that your film gets made. If you get into this cycle of sending it out and waiting for people to get back to you, you could be waiting for a very, very long time. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.